Calvin Reeves was 40 years old when his wife's family had him escorted from her funeral by a man in a gray suit who would not look him in the eye. He drove a 14-year-old pickup with a cracked side mirror. He wore the same sport coat he had owned since 2018. Vivian Holloway had told her circle for 9 straight years that her daughter had married beneath herself, and she had never once run out of new ways to say it. She had come to him in the vestibule of Second Baptist 40 minutes before they carried Denise's casket forward, wearing black that looked newly pressed, and told him in the voice of a woman sharing something practical that this was a family service, that his presence was causing difficulty, and that if he had any true respect for her daughter, he would walk out before the man in the gray suit made it something the congregation would remember. He had looked at Vivian Holloway for a long, clear moment, and then he had walked to his truck and sat in the February cold and watched the church doors close. Harold Holloway's amended trust, drawn up 14 months before his death and signed at Barbara Sims's office on South Tryon Street on October, held $1.2 million in commercial property, liquid reserves, and 46 acres of Union County land that Vivian had already spent 2 years considering sold. What Vivian Holloway had never once thought to ask, not in 9 full years of deciding who Calvin Reeves was what her husband had said to him on the back porch in Waxhaw that October evening, or why Harold had driven himself to his attorney's office alone 3 weeks later without telling a single soul where he was going. What happened that the will reading on a gray Wednesday morning in February would produce a silence that Room had never once offered Calvin Reeves in his life? Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The week after the funeral, his house on Dorita Road had the specific quiet of a place that had recently held more people than it was built for, and now held only one. Calvin sat at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning with coffee he had made out of habit, and the stillness of a man who had not yet decided what the next thing was. The house was modest, 3 bedrooms, a corner lot, a back porch he had built in the second year of their marriage from plans he had drawn himself, and a stack of pressure-treated lumber he had gotten at cost through his firm. The porch was the best thing on the property, and Denise had known it. She used to bring her coffee out there on Saturday mornings and put her feet up on the railing and not say anything for a full hour, which was, she told him once, the most productive hour of her week. He missed those mornings the way you miss something you built yourself, with the knowledge of every nail. His father used to say, what a man builds with his hands, nobody can take with their mouth. He had said it so many times that it had become the kind of phrase that lives in the fingers more than the mind, surfacing whenever Calvin was framing something or leveling something or setting the first course of a project that required patience before it required speed. His father had been gone 11 years, and Calvin still heard him most clearly when he was working. Calvin ran Reeves Structural Consulting out of an office on Commonwealth Avenue, a 3-person firm with a 4th coming on in the spring. Built over 12 years from a single contract with a Charlotte developer who had liked that he showed up on time and did not guess at load calculations. He specialized in residential renovation and light commercial work, and he had a reputation in the industry for the kind of steadiness that made general contractors call him back on the second project before the first one had closed. None of that had ever moved Vivian Holloway or her son Terrence, who managed a car dealership group in Ballantyne and wore suits to family dinners and had treated Calvin for 9 years with the studied courtesy a man offers someone he has already decided is temporary. He had met Denise at a structural engineering conference in Raleigh in the late winter of 2015. She was not an engineer. She was a healthcare administrator attending a session on hospital construction compliance, and she had gotten turned around looking for the right room and had asked him for directions with the directness of a woman who did not perform helplessness. He had walked her there. She had offered coffee afterward. They had talked for 2 hours about buildings and systems and what it meant to design something that had to work even when conditions changed. And he had driven back to Charlotte that evening thinking about the way she asked questions, specifically as if she actually intended to use the answers. They married 2 years later at a vineyard outside Waxhaw. Harold Holloway, Denise's father, had stood beside Calvin before the ceremony and said almost nothing, but had put his hand on Calvin's shoulder in the particular way of a man who did not waste gestures. Harold had been the one Holloway who was simply present with Calvin, not warm in the performed way, not formal in the guarded way. They had talked about land and building and what constituted an honest business. In the last years of Harold's life, When his health had narrowed his world to his house in Waxhaw and the 46 acres he had owned since 1987, Calvin had driven out on Saturday afternoons to sit with him, because nobody else did very often, and because Harold was worth sitting with. Terence called twice that week, once to discuss the estate timeline, once to let Calvin know, in the careful language of a man who believed he was managing a situation, that the family would be handling the probate process and would keep him informed of anything relevant to him. Calvin said thank you both times. He was watching, and he had learned from Harold Holloway that the man who moved quietly moved last. On Saturday morning, Calvin drove to the storage unit on North Tryon, where Denise had kept her personal files. She had been meticulous in the way healthcare administrators tended to be meticulous. Everything labeled, filed in the order she had established in 2019 when she reorganized after Harold's first hospitalization. He had the key. He had always had the key. He pulled 2 banker's boxes and brought them home and set them on the kitchen table and poured fresh coffee, and began. The first hour produced nothing he did not expect. Insurance documents, vehicle titles, the deed to the Dorita Roadhouse in both their names, joint investment account statements in a manila envelope labeled clearly in Denise's handwriting. He found her will in the second box, in a sealed envelope marked Attorney Copy Sims Law Group, with a handwritten note on the outside in Denise's script. Cal, don't let them tell you what this says. Read it yourself. He opened it slowly. 11 pages. He read all 11. He was named sole beneficiary of Denise's estate, the joint investment accounts, her personal savings, her stake in the Dorita Road property, and a specific item in Article 7 that he read twice. Her interest in any proceeds arising from Harold A. Holloway's estate, including any trust assets to which she was entitled as a named beneficiary, hereby transferred in full to Calvin M. Reeves upon her death. His hands did not shake. He set the will on the table and looked at it for a moment. He went back into the box. Behind the folder labeled Dad, Medical sat a sealed envelope addressed to him in Harold's handwriting, which he recognized from the notes Harold used to leave tucked into his screen door at Waxhaw. C. Reeves. Private. The postmark was from 14 months before Harold died. It had been in Denise's files since she received it. She had kept it and said nothing to him, which was the kind of thing Denise sometimes did, held things carefully until the time was right. He opened it. 4 pages, Harold's handwriting clear and deliberate, the way a man writes when he knows he is writing something that will outlast him. Harold wrote about the land, about the 46 acres, and what he had intended for it since 1987, and what he had decided since. He wrote about Calvin specifically, not the son-in-law in the abstract, but the man he had watched build things and keep his word and drive out to Waxhaw on Saturday afternoons when nobody else thought to. He wrote that his family was his family, and he loved them, and he had also come to understand that love and judgment were not always housed in the same person, and that he had made a decision accordingly. The letter was dated 1 week before Harold drove himself to Barbara Sims's office alone on a Thursday afternoon. Calvin moved with the same deliberate calm that had defined every project he had ever built from the ground up. He photographed every page of the will, every page of Harold's letter. He pulled the joint account statements and photographed those. He found the property deed for the Union County land in a folder at the bottom of the second box. Harold had given Denise a copy in 2018 and photographed that too. He pulled up the Mecklenburg County Probate Court's public filing system and searched Harold A. Holloway. The estate had been opened 6 days ago by Terence Holloway, listed as petitioner, with Vivian as co-petitioner. The filing listed the trust's known assets at $940,000. It did not list the Union County land. Calvin looked at that for a long moment. He cross-referenced Union County property records. The 46 acres were registered in Harold's LLC, which had not been dissolved and had not been included in Terence's filing. Either Terence did not know about the LLC, or he had decided not to include it. Neither explanation was innocent. He opened his contacts and found Claudette Warren, estate litigation Dilworth recommended 3 years ago by a contractor colleague whose family had been through something similar. He had never needed her until now. I need to come in this week, he said when she answered. I have a will, a private letter, and a probate filing that left out 46 acres of Union County land. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Tuesday at 9, she said. He was done waiting for anyone to tell him what he was owed. Claudette Warren's office was on East Boulevard, second floor of a converted Victorian, kept deliberately sparse the way someone keeps a workspace when they want clients focused on documents rather than surroundings. She was 53, precise, and had been practicing estate litigation in Charlotte for 22 years, and she reviewed Calvin's materials without changing her expression and without rushing, turning each page with the attention of someone who charged by the hour and believed in earning every dollar. When she finished, she set the stack down and looked across the desk. "The will is clean," she said. "Denise's transfer clause on Harold's trust interest is standard language, and it holds. Barbara Sims is a thorough attorney, and this document will not be successfully challenged on technical grounds." She tapped Harold's letter. "This is not legally binding in isolation, but it establishes intent, and combined with the amended trust instrument, which I expect Barbara has in her file, it creates a record of Harold Holloway's state of mind that no judge will dismiss." She paused. The Union County parcel was never part of the trust. It was held in a separate LLC. Terrence either didn't know or chose not to disclose. Either way, once Barbara presents the amended trust at the will reading, the full picture comes into view, and the omission becomes a matter of record. "What's my exposure? None. You are the injured party here. If they attempt to contest the amended trust, we respond. If they attempt to move on the LLC before the reading, we file an injunction before lunch." She closed the folder. "Your job between now and Wednesday is to do nothing, say nothing, appear to be waiting." Calvin looked at her. "I've been doing that for 9 years." She allowed herself one small nod. "Then you have the discipline for 2 more days." Preparation was the work, the rest would follow. He drove from Dilworth to Kannapolis on a Sunday afternoon to his Uncle Raymond's place, following the route that took him past the Union County line, where the land flattened and the sky widened. Raymond Reeves was 66, retired from the post office, quiet in the manner of a man who had long ago made peace with what words could and could not accomplish. He was Calvin's father's younger brother and had known Calvin longer than anyone still living. Raymond poured sweet tea without being asked and sat on the back porch and listened while Calvin laid it out plainly. When Calvin finished, Raymond was quiet for a long moment, looking at a row of staked tomato plants he had put in that morning. "Harold called me," Raymond said finally, "about 2 years before he died. Out of nowhere, I hadn't talked to him in a couple years. He said he wanted to know what kind of man my nephew was. Said he already had his own opinion, but he wanted to hear it from someone who had nothing to gain." Calvin set his glass down. "I told him you were the most patient man I'd ever seen work," Raymond said. "That you built things the way your father built them, one step at a time, no shortcuts, and when you gave your word, it was because you meant it." He paused. He thanked me, and we talked about land for 20 minutes, and then he hung up. "I never told you because I didn't know what it meant at the time." He looked at his nephew. "Now I do." He looked out over the garden. "Your grandmother used to say, 'Quiet water runs deep and runs long,'" Raymond said. Harold Holloway understood that. His family never did. By Monday, Claudette had confirmed with Barbara Sims's office. Wednesday at 10, Barbara had the amended trust on file, executed and witnessed, signed by Harold Holloway in sound mental condition 14 months before his death. When Claudette relayed that Barbara had been waiting for someone to ask the right questions, Calvin thought of the sealed envelope at the bottom of the second banker's box and the handwriting he had recognized immediately, and the note Denise had left on the outside of it, and the specific, quiet way she had loved him. He went to work Monday and Tuesday as he always did, site reviews, load assessments, a meeting with a general contractor in South End about a 4-story mixed-use project on Moorhead. He answered Terrence's Monday morning call, which was brief and confident, suggesting the family would appreciate Calvin not complicating the probate process and that everyone wanted this handled with dignity. Calvin said he understood completely. He drove out to the Union County land alone on Tuesday evening at dusk and stood at the fence line in the late winter cold and looked at 46 acres of clay-red Carolina soil and thought about Harold saying, on the Waxhaw porch that October, "Some land you hold because it's worth money, and some land you hold because it's worth keeping." Wednesday was coming. Barbara Sims's office was on South Tryon Street, 4th floor, a clean room with good light, and a conference table that seated 8. By 9:50, there were 6 people in it. Barbara at the head, with 2 file folders in front of her. Calvin to her left, with Claudette Warren, Vivian and Terrence across from them. Terrence accompanied by a junior associate named Garrett, who was already reviewing papers when Calvin sat down. Vivian had not spoken to Calvin when he entered. Terrence had given him a single nod, the practiced courtesy of a man who still believed he was managing a situation. Calvin sat down and said nothing. Barbara opened the first folder. The estate of Harold Allen Holloway, she said. I am acting as the estate's designated attorney per the terms of the trust instrument executed in 2009 and amended most recently in October of 2021. She looked around the table with the steady composure of a woman who had read far worse documents than these and never started anywhere but the facts. I will begin with the amended trust instrument as it supersedes the original in several material respects. Terrence's pen was already moving. Garrett leaned forward slightly. Barbara read for 11 minutes. The original trust division, the commercial properties split between Vivian and Terrence per a formula Harold had established in 2009, was confirmed as written. That section was clean and undisputed, and Vivian's expression during it was the expression of a woman confirming what she already knew. Then Barbara turned to the amendment. The Union County land, 46 acres, parcel number recorded, legal description read in full, had been separated from the trust in October 2021 and placed in a subsidiary LLC registered solely in Harold A. Holloway's name for the purpose of independent transfer. The amendment designated one beneficiary for this asset, Calvin Marcus Reeves, husband of Denise M. Holloway Reeves, designated by Harold Holloway in recognition of demonstrated integrity and faithful presence during the years of Harold's illness. In addition, Harold had set aside a cash reserve of $340,000 held apart from the trust's commercial assets, with instructions that it be administered as part of the independent LLC transfer to Calvin. The number settled into the room like a stone settling into still water. Terrence's pen stopped. Vivian looked up. Barbara produced Denise's will next. She read the relevant sections without preamble. Calvin Reeves named as sole beneficiary of Denise's estate, including the Article 7 transfer clause assigning Denise's full interest in Harold's estate to Calvin. Barbara set the document down. Combined with the amended trust provisions and the LLC transfer instrument, Claudette said evenly, my client holds clear and documented title to the Union County parcel, the associated cash reserve, and Denise Holloway Reeves's full estate. These instruments were executed in proper legal form by parties of sound mind and have been in this attorney's custody since their respective execution dates. The probate petition filed 6 days ago omitted the LLC holding entirely. We will be filing a supplemental notice with the court this afternoon. Terrence looked at Garrett. Garrett's expression said what it said. Terrence looked across the table at Calvin and assembled, with visible effort, the face of a man who still had options. Harold wasn't always, in those last months, his judgment. He drove himself to this office? Barbara Sims said quietly. He sat in that chair. He reviewed every line of the amendment and asked me twice whether it was clear enough to survive challenge. I told him it was. He signed it and thanked me and drove himself home. She looked at Terrence without warmth or hostility, only clarity. He was among the most deliberate clients I have ever had the privilege of working with. Vivian had been still for nearly 2 minutes. She looked at Calvin now, and her expression had moved through several stages and arrived somewhere that was not quite recognition, but was very close to it. You could have told us, she said, quietly, not accusing, just the sentence of a woman who had finally arrived at a question she should have asked years before. Calvin looked at her. Harold told me not to, he said. He said some things needed to land in their own time. He was right about most things. He gathered the copies Claudette had prepared and placed them in his portfolio and stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Vivian Holloway with the same even, unhurried steadiness with which he had looked at her in the vestibule of Second Baptist on a February morning when she had asked him quietly to disappear. Harold spent 9 years deciding what I was worth, he said. You spent 9 years deciding what I wasn't. He left a document. You left a memory of a closed door. He picked up his portfolio. Those are different things. He walked out of the conference room and down the hallway and into the elevator and through the South Tryon lobby into the late winter morning, and the city received him without ceremony, which was exactly what he needed. Behind him, In Barbara Sims's conference room, Terrence was speaking to his attorney in a low and careful voice. The documents remained on the table, spread out in order, mapping the precise shape of everything Harold Holloway had decided and everything his family had never thought to ask. 10 months had passed like water. The Union County land had a new fence line Calvin had run himself on, 3 consecutive weekends in April, post by post, working from the survey pins outward, with the deliberate rhythm of a man who had done this kind of work since he was old enough to hold a post hole digger. The eastern 20 acres were committed to a county conservation easement. The remaining acreage was early in development, a modest commercial residential project, durable, built on properly engineered footings, the kind of thing Harold would have recognized immediately as honest work. The first foundation pour was scheduled for March. Calvin had drawn every line of the structural plans himself. Reeves Structural Consulting had added 2 staff members and closed the Moorhead Street contract in October. He had paid off the Dorita Road mortgage in August with a portion of Harold's cash reserve and was still deciding what to do with the house, whether to hold it or let it go to someone who would use it the way it was built to be used. Some decisions required more space than others. A woman named Jade had come into his life in late spring, introduced through a mutual colleague at a firm event he had almost not attended. She was a landscape architect with a calm, professional directness that had no performance anywhere in it. And when she found out what he did, she had asked him what the hardest structural failure he'd ever diagnosed was. They had talked for an hour and a half. She had helped him think through the Union County acreage planning plan, arriving on a Saturday morning in rubber boots with a soil map she had prepared without being asked, which said more about a person than most things said. He heard about Vivian and Terrence through Claudette in June. Terrence's challenge to the amended trust was dismissed without hearing. The instrument was, as Barbara Sims had noted in that conference room, built to last. Terrence had incurred legal fees his attorney required him to pay in advance. A quarterly audit of the Ballantine dealership group had surfaced irregularities unrelated to the estate matter. Nothing filed formally, but the group's financing partners had not renewed his operating agreement. Vivian had stepped down from the Second Baptist Bereavement Committee by July. Several of Harold's oldest associates, who had attended the will reading as witnesses, had not returned her calls since. Calvin registered all of it and returned to what was in front of him. On a morning in late November, with the light coming across the Union County field in long flat lines, gold and patient and indifferent to everything but the land itself, Calvin Reeves stood at the new fence line with his second cup of coffee and looked out at 46 acres of red Carolina soil, and remembered Harold's voice on the Waxhaw porch saying, "Some land you hold, because it's worth money, and some land you hold, because it's worth keeping," and understood now, in the way you only understand things that have cost you something real, that Harold had never once been talking about land. He had built everything worth keeping. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.